My name is Carolyn. I'm 74 years old, and on my daughter's 43rd birthday, she told me the best gift I could give her was to die. Before I tell you how I made her wish come true, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. For 43 of my years on this earth, I truly believe that being a mother was my greatest achievement. My one purpose. Today, standing on the polished stone steps of my daughter's mansion, I found out it was my greatest, most devastating mistake. The Arizona sun was beating down, but I barely felt it. My entire focus was on the box in my hands. It wasn't just any cake. It was a 3-layer red velvet masterpiece from that ridiculously expensive bakery in downtown Scottsdale, the one Jessica adored. It cost me nearly 3 months of my retirement savings, a sacrifice I made without a second thought, just for a chance to see her smile. In my purse, nestled in a velvet box, was the real gift. My mother's pearl necklace. A family heirloom, meant to be passed down through generations of strong women. I rang the bell, my heart filled with a familiar, hopeful flutter. The massive wooden door swung open, and there she was. My daughter Jessica. Beautiful, impeccable, and staring down at her phone with an expression of pure annoyance. She didn't even look up. "Oh, it's you," she muttered, stepping aside just enough for me to squeeze past. No hug. Not even a glance. It was the kind of welcome you'd give a delivery driver. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking with disappointment. "I brought your favorite cake, and a little something special." Jessica let out a long theatrical sigh, the kind that says you are such an inconvenience. "Just put it on the kitchen counter, Mom. I need to finish this call." I walked alone through the cavernous foyer, my sensible shoes echoing on the Italian marble I'd helped pay for. The kitchen was a work of art, all stainless steel and gleaming stone. I gently placed the cake on the enormous island, my reflection staring back at me from the polished granite. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see my grandsons, the twins, splashing in the infinity pool with their nanny. They didn't even turn their heads. I was invisible. 15 minutes later, Jessica breezed in, phone finally tucked away. She grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge. "So," she began, not looking at me, "are you just dropping that off? Or are you staying for dinner?" The coldness in her voice was a physical blow. It felt like a punch to the gut. I was hoping we could spend some time together. It's your birthday after all." She finally turned to face me, her perfectly made-up face a mask of irritation. "Look, Mom," she said, her voice sharp. "We need to talk." She gestured to a bar stool. "Sit." I obeyed, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I knew that tone. It was the same one she used as a teenager right before she'd say something deliberately cruel. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she started, swirling the water in her glass. "About birthdays, about life, about what would truly make me happy." I tried to sound encouraging, my voice a weak whisper. "Of course, dear. Anything. You know I'd do anything for you." That was my mistake. She slammed the glass down on the counter. The sound cracked through the silent kitchen. She looked me dead in the eye, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. It wasn't just irritation anymore. It was pure, unadulterated contempt. "The only thing I'd really like for my birthday," she said slowly, articulating each word like a drop of poison, "is for you to just disappear from my life." The air left my lungs. The room started to spin. "What?" I managed to choke out. "You heard me," she continued, her voice chillingly calm. "And frankly, the best way for you to disappear would be for you to die." The world stopped. The ticking clock on the wall, the faint sounds of the children outside, the hum of the refrigerator, it all went silent. In that deafening void, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't just a heartbreaking. It was something much deeper, something foundational, shattering into a million pieces. And as the shards settled, they began to reform, forged in the icy fire of her words into something new, something hard and sharp, something she would never ever see coming. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the feel of the steering wheel in my hands or the familiar route from the opulent prison of her Scottsdale neighborhood back to my modest, quiet apartment in Phoenix. The pearl necklace in my purse felt like it was made of lead, a heavy weight pulling me down. My mind was a roaring vacuum, filled with only the echo of her words, each one a fresh, twisting blade in my heart. "Preferably by dying." I stumbled through my front door, dropping my keys on the small entryway table with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the profound silence of my home. This was my sanctuary, the place I had painstakingly rebuilt after my husband, David, passed away 20 years ago. I sank onto the worn fabric of the sofa, the same sofa where I'd rocked a feverish, wheezing Jessica to sleep during her childhood asthma attacks. It was the same floral pattern I'd stared at for countless nights, helping her cram for exams, editing her college application essays, celebrating her victories as if they were my own. Her entire life, every peak and every valley, had been the central focus of my own existence. My purpose. And for what? To be dismissed like a piece of trash? To be told my very existence was a burden so heavy that only my death could lift it? The grief was a physical entity. It sat on my chest, a monstrous, invisible weight that stole my breath. But as the hours of the night bled into one another, a strange alchemy began to take place in the crucible of my pain. The sorrow began to burn away, leaving behind something else. Something hard, cold, and heavy. It was anger. A righteous, glacial anger that clarified my thoughts in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I pushed myself off the sofa and walked with a steady, determined gait to the small office closet. On the top shelf, behind stacks of old photo albums, was a heavy cardboard box. It was filled with files, bank statements, receipts, and canceled checks going back decades. I wasn't a hoarder. I was a retired history professor. I documented everything. It was my nature. With the box on my kitchen table, the simple oak table David and I had refinished ourselves one sunny weekend, I began my excavation. I wasn't just looking for numbers. I was unearthing a history of sacrifice. The first file was thin. Jessica Medical, ages 5 to 10. Inside was the receipt from the jeweler where I sold my wedding ring, and the gold locket David had given me for our 10th anniversary. The total was just over $20,000. It covered the series of expensive, specialized allergy treatments the insurance company had refused to pay for. I remembered the allergist's grim face, and the terror I felt. I would have sold my soul to make her well, let alone a few pieces of metal and stone. Next, a thicker file. Jessica High School and College Fund. I pulled out the loan documents for the second mortgage on my apartment. $30,000 for her to spend a year in Italy because all her friends were doing it, and it would be social suicide not to go. I had eaten pasta with butter for a year to make those payments. Then came the tuition statements. The first for a pre-law program. A year later, another for art history. Finally, the 4-year stack from the business school. I had worked weekends tutoring struggling freshmen, given up any thought of travel, and clipped coupons religiously so she could find her passion. Total costs for her passion? Over $150,000. I kept digging. The file for her first wedding was obscene. A binder thick with contracts for caterers, florists, and a string quartet. $50,000 for a party. A marriage that ended in a bitter divorce less than 2 years later. A divorce, I recalled with a fresh wave of fury, that I had also helped finance, paying for her high-powered lawyer. Then came Mark, and the financial demands became a constant, flowing river. Mom, Mark's got a can't-miss investment opportunity. We just need a short-term loan. That was a $25,000 check I never saw again. Mom, the twins have to get into this exclusive private school, if they're going to have any future. I contributed tens of thousands to that future. And then the final, most damning folder. Jessica and Mark's Scottsdale property. Inside was the bank statement showing the transfer of $100,000 from my account to theirs. It was David's life insurance payout, the inheritance he had left to ensure my security in my old age. I had given it to them for the down payment on that soulless mansion. Another statement showed the $50,000 I'd loaned her to launch her spa, a dream I had funded with the very last of my own retirement savings. The first rays of the Arizona sun were beginning to filter through my blinds, casting long shadows across the mountain of paper on my table. My coffee was cold. My hands were shaking, but not from grief anymore. It was rage. I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop and began to type. Line by line, I entered each figure, each documented act of financial self-immolation. When I was done, I hit the sum button. The total appeared at the bottom of the screen in bold, black numbers. It was a figure so obscene, so grotesquely large that it felt like a fantasy. $627,450. $627,450. My entire life savings. My security. My future. Poured into the black hole of her bottomless entitlement. All of it, for a daughter whose birthday wish was my death. Staring at that number, the tears finally stopped. A profound crystalline clarity washed over my entire being. She wanted me to disappear? Fine. I would grant her wish. But I wasn't just going to fade away. I was going to take back every single cent of the life I had so foolishly given her. At precisely 6 a.m., I performed the first act of my new life. It was a digital emancipation. I picked up my phone, my fingers moving with a deliberate, steady purpose. I found Jessica's name in my contacts, the one accompanied by a smiling photo of her, and the twins that I had taken last Christmas. My thumb hovered over the screen for a half-second, then I pressed block contact. A small pop-up asked for confirmation. I pressed block again without hesitation. I did the same for her husband, Mark. It was a simple, silent action, but it felt like slamming a 2-ton steel door on a lifetime of one-sided servitude. I walked into my bathroom and turned the shower on, as hot as I could stand it. As the steam filled the small room, I felt like I was washing away 43 years of accumulated grime. The grime of obligation, of guilt, of putting her needs so far ahead of my own that I had forgotten I even had any. When I stepped out, I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt scoured clean. I bypassed my usual comfortable cardigans and sensible slacks. I went to the very back of my closet and pulled out a navy blue pantsuit I hadn't worn in years. It was my conference suit, my power suit from my university days. It was sharp, tailored, and professional. As I buttoned the jacket, I felt my posture straighten. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back wasn't a fragile 74-year-old widow. She wasn't a rejected mother. She was a creditor. And she was on her way to collect a long-overdue debt. My first stop was the bank. The drive there was different. I noticed things I usually didn't: the brilliant purple of the bougainvillea spilling over a wall, the sharp angles of the mountains against the crisp blue sky. My world had been so small, so focused on her orbit. Now it was opening up. I walked into the familiar air-conditioned calm of the bank branch and bypassed the teller line, going straight to a customer service desk. A young man with a neatly combed side part and a name tag that read Kyle looked up at me with a practiced corporate smile. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I would like to close a joint savings account," I said, my voice clear and even. I slid a piece of paper with the account number across the desk. He typed for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly. "Okay, I see the account, ma'am. Account number ending in 528. This is a joint savings account held with a Jessica Miller." "That is correct. She is my daughter," I stated, making it clear the relationship was a fact, not a plea for sympathy. "I want to close the account and have the entire balance transferred into my personal checking account." Kyle's smile faltered. He looked from his screen to me, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "The balance is $25,000. Ma'am, for a joint account closure of this nature, our bank policy typically requires that both account holders are present to sign the necessary paperwork." I felt a hot flash of anger crawl up my neck, but I kept my voice perfectly level. "Young man, I am the sole contributor to that account. Every single dollar was deposited by me, from my personal retirement fund. It was established as an emergency fund. Well, I am now facing an emergency." "I understand, madame, but it's the bank's policy," he stammered, clearly out of his depth. He lowered his voice, leaning forward conspiratorially. "It's for your own protection, you see, to prevent any misunderstandings. Perhaps you should speak with your daughter first, just to make sure this is what you both want." The condescension, the assumption that I was a confused old woman who didn't know her own mind, was the final straw. "There is no misunderstanding," I cut him off, my voice dropping to an icy calm that made him lean back in his chair. "My daughter has made her wishes perfectly clear. I would now like to speak to your branch manager, Mr. George Harrison." Immediately, the young man's face went pale. He practically jumped out of his chair and scurried towards the back offices. A few moments later, a familiar, kind face appeared. George Harrison had been the manager here for 15 years. He'd handled the paperwork for my late husband's inheritance. He knew me. He knew my history. "Carolyn," he said, extending a hand with a warm but concerned smile. "Kyle said you had an issue. What seems to be the problem?" I explained the situation again, this time to a man who understood context. I left out the brutal emotional details, framing it as a necessary restructuring of my personal finances due to a change in family circumstances. He listened patiently, his eyes never leaving mine, his expression growing more and more serious. He turned to his own computer terminal, looked at the account details and then looked back at me. "Carolyn," he said, his voice gentle but laced with professional gravity, "this is a significant amount and it is legally a joint account. The policy is in place for a reason. Are you absolutely sure this is the step you want to take? Because once this is done, it can't be undone." I looked George Harrison straight in the eye, my gaze unwavering, my hand steady as a rock on the cool marble of the counter. "George, I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life." But as he turned to the printer, I had a chilling thought. This was just the bank. This was the easy part. What I didn't know was that the bank was only the first, and by far the simplest battle I would have to face that day. George Harrison studied my face for a long, contemplative moment. He saw no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. He saw the cold, hard certainty of a woman who had crossed a line and had no intention of ever looking back. He gave a slow, decisive nod. "All right, Carolyn," he said, turning back to his computer. "Let's get this done for you." With a few authoritative keystrokes, he overrode the system hold that Kyle had placed on the account. He printed out a series of forms and swiveled the monitor so I could see the transaction details. "I just need your signature on these transfer and closure documents," he said, sliding them across the counter with a pen. The look on Kyle's face as he watched from the background was a mixture of awe and terror. He had just witnessed a masterclass in how to handle a situation that wasn't in his training manual. My signature, which had felt shaky and frail just that morning, was now firm and resolute. Each stroke of the pen felt like a definitive act of reclaiming a piece of my own soul. Within 10 minutes it was done. The joint account ceased to exist, and the entire $25,000 was safely nestled in my personal checking account, under my sole control. As I shook George's hand, he gave me a look of deep, unspoken understanding. "Take care of yourself, Carolyn," he said, and I knew he meant it. Walking out of that bank and into the bright Arizona morning, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling of potent agency I hadn't experienced since before I became a mother. It was just the beginning. My next stop was across town in a different world entirely. The offices of Scottsdale Premier Mortgage were all gleaming glass and cool, minimalist furniture. It was a place that smelled of money and ambition. My sensible sedan looked out of place in the parking lot filled with Teslas and Range Rovers. My heart was pounding now, a steady, powerful drum against my ribs. This was the main event. This was the move that would dismantle the life she had built on my back. When Jessica and Mark bought that sprawling, ostentatious mansion, their combined income and credit scores weren't nearly enough to secure the loan. They had come to me, full of promises and declarations of love. It was my $100,000 down payment from David's inheritance that made it possible. But even that wasn't enough. The bank had insisted on a guarantor, someone with pristine credit and significant assets to back the loan. I had co-signed the entire mortgage. At the time, it had felt like my solemn duty as a mother, the ultimate act of providing for my child. Now, I saw it for what it was, my greatest strategic advantage. I was shown into the office of a loan officer named Ms. Albright. She was sharp, impeccably dressed, and had a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mrs. Davis," she said, gesturing to a chair. "How can I help you today?" "Ms. Albright," I began, placing my portfolio on her desk. "I am the primary guarantor on mortgage number 78B4 for the property on Silverleaf Trail, held by Jessica and Mark Miller. I have some serious concerns regarding the stability of the loan, and I am here to formally review my rights and obligations under the guarantor agreement." Her professional smile didn't waver, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Interest. "Of course, Mrs. Davis. Let me pull up the file." She typed efficiently, her long nails clicking on the keyboard. "Yes, I see it here. You are indeed the primary co-signer. As you know, this means that if the primary borrowers were to default, The full financial responsibility for the loan would fall to you. I am perfectly aware of my responsibilities, I stated, my voice even and calm. Today I am more interested in my rights. For instance, what procedural steps would be initiated if I, as the guarantor, had documented reason to believe the borrowers were in significant financial distress. Her smile tightened just a fraction. This was clearly not a standard inquiry. Well, that would be a very serious matter indeed. Do you have such a reason, Mrs. Davis? I leaned forward slightly, making sure I had her full attention. My daughter mentioned to me in passing last week that her husband, Mark, had suffered a substantial loss on a recent investment. She also made a comment very casually that they might be a little late on this month's mortgage payment. As the person whose entire financial future is on the line here, I would like you to please check the current payment status of the loan for me. Her fingers flew across the keyboard again. This time she stared at the screen for a long 10 seconds, her mask of professional pleasantry slipping. Her brow furrowed. I see, she said, her voice now stripped of its false warmth. She turned the monitor towards me. The screen was filled with numbers, but one section was highlighted in bright, alarming red. The account for the Miller property, Mrs. Davis, is currently 63 days past due. 63 days. More than 2 full months. They hadn't just been late, they were in active default. And they hadn't said a single word to me. Not one. They were just paddling furiously beneath the surface, hoping I'd throw them a life raft made of my own money, as I always had. The anger was so pure, so intense it made my vision swim for a second. I took a deep, steadying breath. This was not the time for emotion. This was the time for business. Ms. Albright, I said, my voice perfectly level, the voice of a professor addressing a student. Given this documented, undeniable state of default, I would like to formally begin the process of exercising my rights as the guarantor. I am officially petitioning the bank to take action to protect its asset and my financial position. She blinked, finally losing her composure. Ma'am, I need to be clear. Exercising your rights in this manner, it would trigger immediate foreclosure proceedings. I am fully aware of what it will trigger, I said, my gaze as hard as the marble in my daughter's kitchen. Before I tell you about the next crucial piece of my plan, I want you to pause and think about this. For years I had been their safety net. I was the one they called for every problem, every shortfall, every self-inflicted crisis. Now I was about to become the force that unraveled their entire world. And I was just getting started. I requested printed copies of every single document I had ever signed related to the loan, every clause, every addendum outlining my rights as guarantor. Ms. Albright, now seeing the unshakable determination in my eyes, complied without another word of argument. Leaving the mortgage office, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The Arizona sun felt warm and energizing on my skin, not oppressive. I had the paperwork. I had the legal grounds. I had the power. Now I just needed one more thing to bring it all together. An accomplice. I didn't go straight home. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was too potent for the quiet of my apartment. I drove to a small independent coffee shop with a shady patio, a place I knew well, and I called the one person in the world I could trust implicitly. My best friend, Brenda. Brenda and I had been friends for over 20 years, ever since we'd met in a local book club and bonded over a shared disdain for predictable endings. She was a 70-year-old widow, a retired high school drama teacher with a razor-sharp wit, a flair for the dramatic and absolutely zero patience for nonsense. For years she had watched from the sidelines, mostly in silence but with eyes that conveyed a universe of disapproval, as Jessica had drained me emotionally and financially. Brenda never said, "I told you so," but her silence on the subject of my daughter was more damning than any criticism. "Carolyn, you sound different. Are you all right?" she answered on the second ring, her voice immediately sharp with concern. "Brenda," I said, my own voice sounding foreign to my ears, stronger, more resolute. "Meet me at the daily grind. My treat. I have a story to tell you, and I'm going to need your help with the final act." When I arrived 10 minutes later, she was already there. A steaming latte in front of her and a steaming cup of black coffee waiting for me. She took one look at my face and her eyebrows shot up. "Okay," she said, leaning forward with an intense focus. "Spill it. Something major has happened." And I did. I spilled everything. I told her about the drive to Scottsdale, the expensive cake, the family heirloom in my purse. I told her about Jessica's cold dismissal, and then I repeated the words, the awful life-altering words she had spoken in that gleaming marble kitchen. Brenda's face, usually so animated, became a stony mask of fury. Then I told her about the rest of it. The sleepless night, the dusty box of receipts, the horrifying calculation on my laptop screen. I detailed my morning crusade. The showdown with the young teller at the bank, the definitive meeting with Mr. Harrison, and the cold, calculated execution at the mortgage office. Brenda listened without a single interruption, her knuckles white as she gripped her coffee cup. When I finally finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She didn't coddle me. She slammed her hand flat on the wrought iron table, making the coffee cups jump and rattling the sugar dispenser. "It's about damn time, Carolyn," she hissed, her eyes blazing with the fire I had so often admired. "I have been biting my tongue for 15 years, watching that narcissistic, entitled leech bleed you dry. I am so proud of you I could burst. So what's the plan? What's the final act? Are we burning the mansion to the ground? Because I know a guy who sells very flammable fertilizer and asks no questions." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a genuine deep laugh escaped my lips. It felt rusty but wonderful. "Nothing quite that dramatic, Bren," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. "My plan is a little more elegant. And it requires a star performer." Brenda's eyes lit up, the old drama teacher in her instantly engaged. "A performance? I'm listening." "I'm going to disappear," I said, leaning across the table. Just like she wanted. "I'm leaving the country on Sunday. But before I go, I want to make sure she understands the true, tangible cost of her wish. That's where you come in. I'm your woman," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What's my role?" "You are the concerned best friend," I explained. "I need you to be my accomplice. I'll be gone by Sunday morning. On Tuesday afternoon, I want you to go to Jessica's house. You will be frantic. You'll tell her you haven't been able to reach me for a couple of days, that I'm not answering my phone. You'll say you used your spare key to check on my apartment and found it empty, except for a single thick envelope on the kitchen table, addressed to her." "Oh, this is delicious," Brenda whispered, rubbing her hands together with theatrical glee. "A monologue of distress, a prop of great significance. What's in the envelope?" "My masterpiece," I said. "My final thesis." That night, fueled by black coffee and a lifetime of repressed anger, I stayed up until 3 in the morning composing it. It was not a letter. It was an indictment. A 20-page, meticulously documented accounting of my maternal servitude. It was not emotional or bitter. It was as cold and hard as a legal brief. The first 10 pages were the financial history. I attached copies of key receipts and bank statements. The $20,000 for the allergist. The $30,000 for Italy. The $150,000 for the college fund she'd squandered on changing majors. The 2 lavish weddings and the expensive divorce lawyer. The endless loans to her husband. The $100,000 inheritance from her father that she had used to buy a house she could not afford. Each item was listed with a date and a cold, hard number. The final pages were the execution of the sentence. I included a notarized copy of the formal notice I had filed with the mortgage company, exercising my rights as guarantor. I included a copy of the bank slip showing the joint account had been closed and its balance moved. I included a formal letter informing her that the supplementary health insurance policy I paid for, the one that covered her, Mark, and the twins, had been canceled, effective immediately. The last document was a freshly revised and notarized copy of my last will and testament. In it, her inheritance had been officially reduced to a single symbolic dollar. The remainder of my estate, which was now significantly larger, was to be placed in a trust. The trust's purpose? To establish the David Davis Memorial Scholarship for history students at my old university. She wouldn't get a cent. The final paragraph of the cover letter read, "You wished for me to disappear from your life. As your mother, I have always done my best to grant your wishes. So I have. You are now free from the burden of my presence, my advice, and my emotional needs. You are also, as of today, free from my financial support. I truly hope this newfound freedom is everything you dreamed it would be. "This is not a punishment, Jessica. It is simply the natural and unavoidable consequence of your own actions." As I sealed the thick, heavy envelope, it didn't feel like a goodbye letter. It felt like a final grade. It felt like an invoice for a lifetime of service. And I knew with an absolute and chilling certainty that it was a bill Jessica could never, ever afford to pay. The days leading up to my departure were a blur of clandestine activity. I felt like a spy in my own life. I booked a one-way first-class ticket to Lisbon, Portugal. Why first class? Because for the first time in my life I decided I was worth it. Why Lisbon? I'd seen it once in a travel magazine years ago. A city of 7 hills, of sun-drenched tiles and melancholy fado music. I had torn the page out and kept it, a secret dream tucked away in a drawer. I'd always told myself I'd go someday. Jessica's cruelty hadn't broken me. It had simply, brutally, brought someday crashing into the present. I systematically dismantled my old life. I arranged for my car to be sold. I contacted a realtor to list my apartment. I packed 2 large suitcases, and the process was a revelation. I wasn't just packing clothes. I was curating a new existence. I packed my favorite books, the ones with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. I packed the photographs of David, his warm smile a comforting presence. I packed my favorite worn-in jeans and a few elegant scarves. It was shocking how little I truly needed when I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. Each item I placed in the suitcase felt like a deliberate, joyful choice for my future, not a dusty remnant of a past spent in service to someone else. On Sunday morning, long before the sun had begun to bake the Phoenix streets, Brenda arrived at my apartment. She came not as a somber friend saying goodbye, but as a co-conspirator, a thermos of strong black coffee in one hand and a mischievous grin on her face. "Ready for your great escape, Thelma?" she quipped, referencing one of our favorite book club movies. "More than ready, Louise," I replied, managing a small, genuine smile. We performed one final check. She had the spare key to my apartment. She had the thick, menacing envelope, my 20-page Declaration of Independence. The plan was set. She would give me 2 full days to get settled before enacting her worried friend performance on Tuesday afternoon. It was the perfect amount of time for me to be truly untraceably gone. The taxi I'd ordered pulled up to the curb precisely on time. As the driver loaded my bags into the trunk, I took one last, lingering look at the small apartment that had been my home for 2 decades. I expected to feel a wave of sadness, a pang of nostalgia for the life I was leaving behind. But strangely, I felt nothing of the sort. I felt only a profound sense of relief, as if I were being paroled from a prison I had unknowingly built for myself, bar by bar, sacrifice by sacrifice. To the airport, I told the driver, my voice clear and steady. Those 3 simple words felt like an incantation, the beginning of my real life. The long flight across the Atlantic was a revelation. For the first time in as long as I could remember, my mind was blessedly quiet. There was no one I needed to call, no one's problems I needed to untangle, no one expecting anything from me. It was an intoxicating, slightly terrifying, and utterly glorious freedom. I didn't watch a movie or read a book. I just stared out the window at the endless expanse of clouds and sky, feeling the tightly coiled knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for 43 years finally, slowly begin to unwind. I landed in Lisbon on Monday morning to bright, warm sunshine and the faint, salty scent of the sea on the breeze. A representative from a relocation service I'd hired online, a young, friendly man named Pedro, was waiting for me just outside customs, holding a sign with my name on it. He drove me through the vibrant, bustling city to a charming, furnished apartment he had arranged for me in the historic Alfama district. It was on the 3rd floor of an old, ochre-colored building, and it had a small wrought-iron balcony that overlooked a cobblestone square with a bubbling fountain in the center. It was tiny, but it was perfect. It was mine. That first afternoon after Pedro left, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went for a walk with no destination, no purpose, no errands to run. I let my feet carry me through the winding, narrow streets, marveling at the beautifully tiled buildings and the laundry fluttering from balconies like prayer flags. I found a small cafe, a pasteleria, and ordered a strong coffee and a pastel de nata, the famous Portuguese custard tart. I sat at a little table outside, in the shade of an orange tree, and I watched the world go by. I savored every bite of the sweet, warm, creamy pastry, And then a strange, unfamiliar feeling bubbled up in my chest. It took me a moment to identify it. It was happiness. A simple, profound, uncomplicated happiness that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or needs. It was just for me. And as I sat there, I realized something else. I was smiling. A real, genuine smile that actually reached my eyes. It felt foreign but absolutely wonderful. As the sun began to set over Lisbon, casting a magical golden glow on the ancient city, I sat on my new balcony with a glass of crisp, cold vinho verde. Back in Arizona, it was midday. I knew Brenda was preparing for her performance, probably rehearsing her lines in the car. The curtain was about to rise on the final explosive act of my old life. Exactly as I had foreseen, at midnight in Lisbon, my phone began to buzz. It was a violent, frantic vibration against the small wooden table on my balcony, a jarring intrusion into the peaceful night. The screen lit up with Jessica's face, a smiling, professionally taken headshot. My heart, which had been beating with a slow, contented rhythm, gave a single hard thud, and then settled into a steady, calm pace. I was ready. I watched the screen, letting the call go to voicemail. The phone immediately started ringing again. The frantic urgency was palpable even through the silence. And again, on the fifth consecutive call, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the crisp taste, and then I answered. "Mom." Her voice was a high-pitched shriek, a ragged, ugly sound torn apart by tears and raw panic. "Oh my God, Mom. Where are you? Brenda was just here. She was crying. She said she couldn't find you. She gave me this envelope. What is this letter? What have you done?" The raw hysteria in her voice was exactly as I had imagined it would be. I looked out at the twinkling lights of the city spread out below me, the ancient castle on the hill illuminated against the dark sky. I felt a strange, profound sense of detachment, as if I were 1,000 miles away, watching a particularly dramatic play unfold on a distant stage. "I did exactly what you wished for, Jessica," I said, my voice as calm and cool as the night air. "I disappeared." "What? No, I didn't mean it like that," she wailed, the words tumbling out in a desperate, incoherent rush. You can't do this. The house? You can't take our house. And the bank accounts? Mom, what is going on? This is insane." "I believe the documentation I provided is quite clear," I replied, my tone perfectly level, like a professor explaining a simple concept to a struggling student. "It's not insanity, Jessica. It's a summary of transactions. It's cause and effect." "Transactions?" she screeched, her voice cracking. "You are ruining our lives. Mark is having a complete meltdown. We got a formal notice from the mortgage company today. A letter from a lawyer. They're talking about foreclosure. They're going to take our home." "Yes," I said, taking another sip of wine. "That is the standard legal procedure when one fails to pay one's mortgage for over 60 days. It's all in the contract you signed." There was a sputtering, choking sound on the other end of the line. We were going to handle it. We were going to figure it out. I was just stressed, Mom. Can't you understand that? Mark lost a lot of money in a bad investment. The spa isn't doing as well as I'd hoped. I was under a lot of pressure and I took it out on you. I'm sorry. Okay. There, I said it. I'm sorry. Now just tell me where you are and come home, and we can fix all of this. I'm sorry. The two words I had craved for years, the words I thought would heal everything. But now, hearing them, they sounded utterly hollow, pathetic, and self-serving. They weren't an apology for the decades of disrespect. They weren't an apology for the soul-crushing cruelty of her birthday wish. They were a desperate, frantic plea to turn the money spigot back on before the well ran completely dry. I decided it was time to ask the question that had been burning in my mind since that fateful afternoon. The one question that would cut through all the lies, all the manipulation, and expose the cold, hard truth of our relationship. Tell me something, Jessica, I said, my voice dropping to a soft but piercing whisper. I need you to be honest for once in your life. Do you need me, your mother? Or do you need my money? The silence on the other end of the line was the most profound, the most damning I have ever experienced. Stretched on and on. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. In that deafening silence, I heard my answer more clearly than if she had screamed it from the rooftops. She couldn't say it. She couldn't bring herself to utter the lie, not now. Not when her entire fabricated world was crumbling around her. Finally, a tiny broken whisper came through the phone. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed, my voice devoid of all emotion except a final weary certainty. What wasn't fair was spending 43 years sacrificing every dream, every dollar, every piece of myself for a daughter who would look me in the eye and wish me dead for her birthday. Words have consequences, Jessica. Your actions have consequences. You made your wish. Now you get to live with it. With that, I pressed the red icon on the screen, ending the call, and severing the final thread of my old life. The silence that followed was the most peaceful, the most liberating sound I had ever heard. I took another slow sip of wine and watched the moon rise over the Tagus River. I silenced my phone, the quiet of the Lisbon night washing over me like a benediction. I thought that would be the end of her attempts. I thought she would finally be forced to face the reality she had created. I was so wrong. Her next move would be far more sinister, far more vicious, than I could have ever possibly imagined. For one glorious week there was silence. Blessed, uninterrupted silence. I began to truly settle into my new life, to feel the rhythms of Lisbon seep into my bones. I found a local market overflowing with fresh produce and cheeses, and I started cooking for myself again. Simple meals enjoyed on my balcony. I enrolled in a beginner's Portuguese class at a small language school, and the challenge of wrestling with new words and grammar made me feel sharp and alive. I spent my afternoons reading in sunny, tile-adorned plazas, sipping tiny, potent coffees and feeling like a character in a novel. I was beginning to feel like Carolyn again, a person with interests and thoughts of her own, not just a mother, a function, a resource to be tapped. The peace, however, was a fragile illusion, and it was shattered by an unexpected call from a Phoenix area code. It was Dr. James Evans, my family doctor for over 30 years. He was a kind, gentle man with silver hair and a reassuring bedside manner. A man who had treated Jessica's childhood asthma and my husband David's final illness. He was a pillar of trust in my life. "Carolyn," he said, and I immediately detected an unusual strain in his voice, a deep, uncomfortable concern. "I'm so glad I was able to reach you. Well, Carolyn, I had a rather unusual and frankly deeply disturbing visit today." A cold knot of dread formed in the pit of my stomach. It was a feeling I knew all too well, the precursor to one of Jessica's manufactured crises. "What is it, James? Is everything all right?" He took a deep breath, the sound sighing through the phone. It was Jessica and her husband, Mark. They came into my office this morning without an appointment. "Carolyn," they expressed what they termed serious concerns about your mental state. I gripped the edge of my wrought iron table, my knuckles turning white. "My mental state?" I repeated, the words tasting like poison. "Yes," he continued, his voice now laced with a quiet anger. "They told me you've been exhibiting highly erratic and paranoid behavior. They said you vanished without a word, have cut off all contact, and have made a series of catastrophically reckless financial decisions. Carolyn," they used the words cognitive decline and possible early onset dementia. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. I was floored. It was one thing to be cruel, to be ungrateful, to wish me dead in a fit of pique. It was another thing entirely to plot to strip me of my sanity, to wield the authority of medicine to paint me as an incompetent, senile old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life or her own money. This wasn't just an attack on my actions. It was an attack on my very identity, on my mind. "They were asking questions, Carolyn," Dr. Evans said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "Very specific, probing questions. They wanted to know what the medical and legal process was for a family member to obtain a medical power of attorney. They were trying to build a case, using me as a pawn, to have you declared legally incompetent. This was her new plan, her plan B. If she couldn't guilt trip or bully me into coming back to fix her life, she would try to have me legally erased. She would seize control of my finances, reverse all of my decisions, and no doubt, try to force me back to Arizona and into some kind of managed care, all under the guise of loving concern. The betrayal was so profound, so multi-layered, it almost buckled my knees. She had taken our trusted family doctor, a man who had known me for decades, a man who held my deepest medical confidences, and tried to turn him into a weapon against me. A fury unlike anything I had ever felt rose up in me. A clean white-hot rage. "James," I said, my voice shaking not with fear, but with righteous anger. "Let me tell you exactly what happened. Let me tell you about the reckless decisions and the erratic behavior." And I did. I told him everything. I told him about the birthday wish, the soul-crushing words spoken with such casual cruelty. I told him about the sleepless night, the box of receipts, the final horrifying tally of my life savings. I told him about my methodical, calculated decisions at the bank and the mortgage company. I told him that I wasn't suffering from cognitive decline. I was experiencing a cognitive awakening. I was healthier, clearer, and happier than I had been in years. He listened without a single word of interruption. When I finally finished, my voice thick with emotion, there was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. "Carolyn," he finally said, and the warmth was back in his voice, now mixed with a steely anger of his own. "I am so sorry you are going through this. I have known you for 30 years. You are one of the sharpest, most lucid women I know. To even suggest dementia is not just wrong, it's malicious." "They're desperate, James," I said, a single hot tear rolling down my cheek. "They're losing the house, and they'll do anything to get the money back." "This is more than desperation, Carolyn, it's despicable," he replied, his voice firm. "I want you to know, I am making a formal detailed note in your permanent medical file about this visit right now. I am documenting their attempt to manipulate me into supporting a false claim of incompetence for financial gain. It's a matter of official record now. You have my full unequivocal support." The relief that washed over me was so immense it felt like a physical wave. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time, they were tears of profound gratitude. I wasn't alone in this fight. "Thank you, James," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "That means more than you will ever know." Knowing I had Dr. Evans and his official documentation on my side was a huge relief, a shield I desperately needed. But Jessica, having failed in her insidious attempt to manipulate my trusted doctor, was about to escalate her war to a whole new, terrifying level. She was going to involve the government. Just 2 days after my fortifying conversation with Dr. Evans, the official government-sanctioned attack came. It wasn't a phone call this time. It was a formal, chillingly impersonal email that landed in my inbox. The sender was the U.S. consulate in Lisbon. The subject line read, "Urgent. Official welfare check request. U.S. citizen Carolyn Davis." My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open, my hand trembling slightly. The email was composed in dry, bureaucratic language, but its message was a declaration of war. It stated that the consulate had received a formal high-priority report from Adult Protective Services, APS, in the state of Arizona. The report, filed by my daughter Jessica Miller, alleged that I, her elderly mother, had abruptly vanished under suspicious circumstances. It claimed I was potentially suffering from a severe and undiagnosed mental health crisis, rendering me incapable of making sound decisions. And the final, most venomous accusation, that I was possibly being financially exploited and held against my will by unknown, malicious third parties in a foreign country. She had actually done it. She had weaponized the very system designed to protect vulnerable seniors. She had filed an official government report, painting me as a senile, endangered victim, a pawn in some nefarious international scheme. It was a calculated, vicious move designed to trigger an international incident, to force the authorities in both countries to track me down, detain me, and subject me to a battery of psychological evaluations, all in the desperate, diabolical hope of finding a doctor somewhere who would label me incompetent. I felt a surge of white-hot rage that threatened to consume me, but I took a deep, shuddering breath and forced it down. Panic was what she wanted. A panicked, emotional response would only fuel her narrative of the unstable, confused old woman. A calm, methodical, and strategic response was what she would get. I spent the next hour crafting my reply. I didn't defend or explain. I simply stated facts. I wrote that I was safe, sound, and living happily in Lisbon of my own free and uncoerced will. I stated that the report filed by my daughter was a malicious and demonstrably false fabrication stemming from a family financial dispute, which I was prepared to document. And then I played my trump card. I told them to contact my personal physician of 30 years, Dr. James Evans in Phoenix, providing his full contact information. I stated that he could attest to my long-term cognitive health and could also provide them with crucial context regarding the complainant's motivations. I attached a signed, notarized letter authorizing them to speak with him. I hit send. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I barely ate. I couldn't focus on my Portuguese lessons. I just waited, pacing the beautiful tiled floor of my small apartment, my future hanging in the balance, dependent on the integrity of bureaucrats an ocean away. Finally, on the third day the reply came. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse to click it open. It was from the same consular officer. It was short and to the point. Dear Mrs. Davis, thank you for your prompt and thorough response. We have been in contact with your physician, Dr. Evans, in Arizona. Based on his unequivocal medical assessment and the additional information he provided, we have concluded our investigation. We have determined the report filed with APS to be unfounded. We are closing the case, effective immediately. The originating agency in Arizona has been notified of our findings. A formal note has been placed on file regarding the submission of a false and potentially malicious report by the complainant, Ms. Jessica Miller. We wish you well during your time in Portugal. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, the words blurring through a sudden flood of tears. Tears of overwhelming, bone-deep relief. She had failed. Her final, most vicious attack had not only been repelled, it had backfired spectacularly. She was now on official record with the state agency for filing a malicious false report against her own mother. She had tried to destroy my credibility, and in the process had irrevocably destroyed her own. Can you believe the sheer, unmitigated audacity? A daughter who wished for her mother's death was now pretending to be worried about her safety, all for the sake of money. This story is a testament to how far some people will go when their comfortable world is threatened. Stick with me because the consequences of this final desperate act are what truly brought her entire world crashing down for good. Less than a week later, I got the call I had been waiting for. It was from my lawyer in Arizona, the sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Chan whom I had hired to oversee the mortgage situation. Carolyn, I have the final update, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. The bank has officially moved forward on the foreclosure. Given the 63-day default, your formal petition as guarantor, and now the documented false report with APS which we submitted as evidence of malicious intent, the judge granted our motion. The notice was served to Jessica and Mark Miller this morning. They have 30 days to vacate the property. It was done. The final blow had landed. They had pushed me, slandered me, and tried to strip me of my very identity. And in doing so, they had lost the one thing they valued above all else, the house. The symbol of the perfect life they had built on my sacrifices. They had lost everything. But in the midst of their spectacular downfall, a strange and unexpected email appeared in my inbox from the last person on earth I ever expected to hear from again. The days immediately following the foreclosure notice were profoundly, deeply quiet. The barrage of frantic calls and manipulative emails from Arizona had ceased entirely. The silence was its own kind of victory, a testament to the fact that they had finally run out of ammunition. But it was also a hollow, lonely kind of quiet. In fighting for my freedom, for my very sanity, I had effectively severed my only remaining family ties. The reality of that settled on me, not with regret, but with a somber weight. To cope with this new, untethered feeling, I did what academics do. I researched. I looked for connection, for context. I stumbled upon online forums and private social media groups, digital campfires for parents of estranged adult children. Hesitantly, feeling vulnerable, I wrote out my story. I changed the names and the specific locations to protect my privacy, but the raw, painful truth of it was all there. The birthday wish, the financial accounting, the sinister attack on my competence. I posted it in a group called Life After Estrangement, Finding a New Path. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few words of commiseration, a digital pat on the back. What I received was an avalanche. A tidal wave of recognition and shared pain. Hundreds of replies poured in from all over the country, from all over the world. Women and men shared stories that were so eerily, heartbreakingly similar to my own it made me weep. Stories of being treated not as a parent but as an ATM. Of being the default, unpaid babysitter, expected to drop everything at a moment's notice, only to be berated for interfering. Stories of love being twisted into a weapon of obligation, of being cherished when useful and cast aside when boundaries were finally, painfully set. One woman from Ohio wrote, "My son, who is 45, told me I was unbelievably selfish for selling my large family house to downsize into a condo. Why? Because now he wouldn't have a place to store his fishing boat for free during the winter. He hasn't spoken to me since." Another man from Florida shared, "My daughter only calls me on the first of the month, like clockwork, right after my Social Security and pension checks are deposited. She calls it checking in on me, but the conversation always ends with a request for money for an emergency, a new designer handbag or a weekend trip to Miami." Reading their stories, I cried. Not for myself this time, but for all of us. I wasn't a singular tragic case of a monstrously ungrateful daughter. I was part of a silent, heartbroken, invisible army of parents who had given too much, loved too hard, and been left with the ashes of their sacrifice. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in my pain. I felt seen. I felt understood. A few days after my post, a private message landed in my inbox. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the subject line made my blood run cold. It read simply, "From your son-in-law." My first instinct was to delete it without reading. It had to be a trick, another angle of attack. But a morbid curiosity, a need to see the final chapter, got the better of me. My hand trembled as I clicked it open. It was from Mark. He wrote, "Carolyn, I don't know how, but someone from one of my financial groups shared an anonymous story in a post about family loans. I started reading it, and my stomach just dropped. It was you. I knew it was your story. Our story. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. There is nothing left to ask for. It's too late for that. I'm writing because I have to say it for my own soul, I guess. You were right. About everything. I stood by for years and watched as Jessica treated you not like a mother, but like a resource. And I let it happen. I encouraged it. Because I was weak, and because we were living a lifestyle far beyond our means, a lifestyle subsidized entirely by your generosity. I was a coward and I am deeply ashamed. What she said to you on her birthday was unforgivable. What she did with Dr. Evans and with Adult Protective Services was monstrous. I told her so. I told her she had crossed a line from which there was no coming back. We are in the middle of a nasty, bitter divorce. I've lost the house, my wife, everything. I suppose it's what I deserve. I just wanted you to know that at least one person in this family sees the truth. I see what you sacrificed. The boys miss you terribly. They ask about you all the time. One day, when they are old enough to understand, I will tell them the real story. I will not let them grow up thinking their grandmother was anything but the strongest woman I have ever known. I hope you are happy. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Mark." I read the email 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. It wasn't an apology designed to manipulate or to gain something. It was a confession. A raw, painful admission of his own culpability. It didn't fix the years of damage, it didn't heal the gaping wound in my heart, but it was validation. It was the truth, finally spoken aloud by someone who had been complicit in the lie for so long. Mark's email was a single unexpected crack of light in a very dark room. It didn't fix anything, but it was the truth. And just as I was processing this stunning admission, another email arrived in my inbox, this time from my lawyer with financial news so shocking, so poetic in its justice, that it would change the entire landscape of my new life forever. "Carolyn, are you sitting down?" Miss Chun, my lawyer, asked the moment I answered the phone. Her usually crisp, businesslike voice was buzzing with an unfamiliar energy, a kind of excited disbelief. "I am," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I braced myself for another complication, another legal hurdle. "Good. Because I have some rather spectacular news regarding the Scottsdale property," she began. "The foreclosure auction was completed this morning. Now, typically in these situations the bank gets its money and that's the end of it. But because of the ridiculously hot real estate market in that area, the house sold for significantly more than the outstanding mortgage balance." "Okay," I said slowly, not yet understanding the implication for me. "So the bank made a profit." "Here's where it gets interesting and frankly beautiful," she continued, and I could practically hear the grin in her voice. "I did some digging into Arizona's guarantor and real estate laws. There's a specific statute that states when a property is sold at a surplus after a default that was initiated by the guarantor's petition, that guarantor is legally entitled to be reimbursed for their documented initial capital investment before any remaining surplus funds, if any, go to the defaulted homeowners. I was stunned into silence, my mind racing to catch up. My initial investment? You mean the down payment? The money from my husband's inheritance? Exactly that, she confirmed, her voice triumphant. The $100,000 you put down for them. Furthermore, we successfully argued in a motion to the court that the $50,000 you gave Jessica for her spa business was essentially a linked, non-diversified investment in their overall lifestyle and financial stability, which the judge, who was clearly not impressed with their antics, agreed with. After all the bank's fees and our legal costs are settled, a check will be issued directly to you. Carolyn, you are getting back $120,000 of your money. I couldn't speak. I just sat there on my small balcony, the phone pressed hard against my ear, looking out at the sunlit square below my window where children were chasing pigeons. $120,000. Money I had mourned and written off as lost forever, a sunk cost in the failed enterprise of my daughter's happiness, was coming back to me. And Carolyn, there's more, Miss Chen added, as if this news weren't stunning enough. I just received confirmation from the title company. The sale of your Phoenix apartment closed yesterday. After all commissions and fees, the net proceeds being wired directly to your account in Lisbon are $252,000. I did the math in my head, my hands shaking. With the money from the house sale and the sale of my apartment, added to the savings I had already protected, my net worth was now significantly higher than it had been before this entire nightmare began. I hadn't just survived. I had, against all odds, triumphed. Financially, I was more secure at 74, living alone in a foreign country, than I had ever been in my entire life. A few weeks later, a thick manila envelope arrived, forwarded from Ms. Chen's office. It had been sent to my old Phoenix address. A lost piece of mail from a former life. The handwriting on the front was blocky and youthful, immediately recognizable. Inside, there was no letter from an adult, no legal document. Instead, there were two hand-drawn pictures. One showed a stick figure with curly gray hair, labeled Grandma, smiling on a balcony with a bright yellow sun in the corner. The other showed the same figure on an airplane flying over a blue ocean. Tucked between them was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. It was a letter, written in two different, distinct adolescent scrawls. Dear Grandma, Dad told us the real story about why you left. He showed us some of the things Mom said. He said she was very mean to you and that wasn't right. We're really sorry that happened. We miss you a lot. We hope you are happy in your new home. Dad said you were really brave to start a new life and we think so too. We are proud of you. We love you. From Jacob and Noah. Holding my grandson's letter in my trembling hands, I began to cry. For the first time since that terrible life-altering birthday, I cried. But these were not tears of pain or grief. They were tears of love, of relief, of profound, heartbreaking vindication. I had lost a daughter, but I had not lost the love of these two sweet boys. And in that moment I knew that was the richest inheritance I could ever have hoped for. My new life was complete. Or so I thought, until one final, unexpected email from Jessica arrived 3 long years later. 3 years passed. 3 wonderful, peaceful, exquisitely fulfilling years. I turned 77. I bought my own small, beautiful apartment in Lisbon with cash. A place with high ceilings and a balcony big enough for a small garden of geraniums and herbs. I became, to my own surprise, fluent in Portuguese. I traveled. I took a train to Seville to see the flamenco dancers. I went to Paris and saw the Mona Lisa without feeling rushed. I visited the ancient ruins in Rome. I had a community of dear friends, a lively mix of fellow expats and warm, funny locals who knew me simply as Carolyn, the retired history professor with a passion for good wine and lively debate. They valued me for my company, not my checkbook. I was, for the first time in my adult life, profoundly, deeply, and unapologetically happy. The past in Arizona began to feel less like a traumatic wound and more like a story that had happened to someone else, a novel I had read long ago. I had no direct contact with Jessica. Mark sent a polite Christmas card with a new photo of the boys each year, and I sent one back to his new address. That was the extent of it. The door was closed. Then one quiet Tuesday morning, as I was enjoying my coffee and a fresh pastry on my balcony, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was a name I had not seen in 3 years. Jessica Miller. My first visceral instinct was to delete it unread. A jolt of the old anxiety, the old dread shot through me. Why now? What could she possibly want? But then I took a breath. After all this time, after all I had been through, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I was just curious. Clicked it open. The email was startlingly short, devoid of the usual drama and manipulation. Mom, I know you have no reason to read this, and I promise I am not asking for anything. I just needed to write it. Someone, a former friend I guess, sent me a link to an article online about a mother's story of estrangement. I knew from the first paragraph that it was yours. After that, I bought the book you wrote. I read it in one night. I never knew. I swear to you, I never knew the depth of your sacrifice or the depth of my own cruelty until I saw it all laid out in black and white. It wasn't just words. It was numbers, dates, a history of my selfishness that I could no longer deny. I was a monster. There's no other word for it. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. What you did was not to punish me. It was to save yourself. And you were right to do it. I hope you are happy. You truly deserve it. I read the email once, then twice. There were no excuses. No blame shifting. Just a stark, painful, and seemingly honest admission. I sat on my sun-drenched balcony, looking out at the brilliant blue sky over the Tagus River, the scent of my geraniums sweet in the air. I thought about replying, about what I could possibly say. But what was there to say? Some chasms are too wide to cross. Some bridges, once they have been burned to ash, simply cannot be rebuilt. I closed my laptop. I didn't delete the email. I just let it be. A final message in a bottle, washed up on the peaceful shore of my new life. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was just an end. A confirmation that the long, destructive storm was truly finally over. Jessica gave me the cruelest birthday wish imaginable. But in the end, it turned out to be the greatest gift I ever received. It forced me to stop living for her and finally start living for myself. It gave me this life, this peace, this joy. It gave me back to me. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt it was necessary. I have a question for all of you watching. Have you ever had a moment in your own life where you knew deep in your bones that you had to choose yourself, even if it meant losing someone you loved? Please share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. Your experiences are valid, and your voice matters. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories of strength, survival, and new beginnings. Remember, you are not alone.